So welcome everyone. Apologies for the technical hitches, all my fault. So we've got a SAFPAC seminar this evening. I'm delighted Jake here, Jake Osborne, who some of us here know from the Therapeutic Association. He's coming to speak with us, explore with us something to do with authenticity and with Heidegger and Freud. Welcome, Jake. And, I don't know if you want to say something about yourself or anything like that, life story.
No, not particularly.
No?
I just like to get on with it.
Oh, sorry, to go.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. And yeah, talking about authenticity, particularly with regards to Heidegger, but hopefully also using that to help us think a bit about some of what Freud might be saying. And I'm going to start though by talking just more generally about how the term authenticity is used in our everyday culture. Yeah, and hopefully ask that you might kind of keep an eye out or an ear out for that. Might have noticed a bit of how the word's used, how other people use it, how we might use it. Think a bit about that. And the main reason for doing that is this kind of Heidegger's got this understanding that everyday culture and common sense tend to both kind of reveal something about what's going on fundamentally, but also conceal it at the same time. And as a result, these kind of everyday notions tend to be what he calls destructive. That idea of kind of opening up the underlying presuppositions, show the way that they both constrain and liberate us. And in the reading that I gave you, he does a bit of that with that about being guilty. Similar kind of thing for that.
Wasn't an easy read.
Yeah. Well, hopefully all together we can kind of start to work out what he was going on about there. Secondly, I think we can think about Freud in terms of the kind of more conventional notion of authenticity, as well as the kind of more Heidegger version. And there's another reason why we would start with thinking about a conventional everyday use of the word. But I'm not going to tell you that yet because that would be a bit of a spoiler. Hopefully, come on to realise that a bit later. And the kind of final reason why I wanted to start with this is that this, I suppose, is what got me thinking about authenticity in the first place. I was listening to the radio and they were talking about Love Island. And kind of one of the pundits on the programme said, well, yeah, I think what the audience are really looking for from the couples is authenticity. Yeah, they really could have brought me up sharp. What's going on here? Have we got so desperate that we're looking for, to Love Island for authenticity? I mean, I've never watched Love Island, so.
Maybe so.
No. So I mean, it might be that it's a hotbed of authenticity. I don't know, but anyway, it made me think. And listening to the guy a bit more, it became clear what he meant by authenticity. Really was basically just being believable. Actually, what he meant by that seemed to be really just kind of fulfilling kind of conventional notions of romantic love. The idea of kind of being made for each other. So that actually made me even more confused. I didn't think that's what authenticity was about. Just being believable. Or, I thought it was the opposite of fitting in with so I really kind of wondered what's going on with authenticity. And hopefully you will have kind of picked up a bit on that if you've been listening out for pieces of this. I don't know if anyone's got any examples they've noticed recently of using it. Just very brief example, perhaps suggestion of what they might have meant when they used it, or what you meant to mean. You might call yourself using the term. What did I mean when I said that? Anybody got any examples?
I wonder if you can be authentic if you know you're being watched by people on an entertainment show.
Hard to believe.
I even wonder how, after the end of the sessions here, how authentic I've been here with everyone's eyes on me. I don't know if you're meeting some expectations people have of you. That's kind of the day self, isn't it? Really getting caught in the day self.
Yeah, but when you're saying that, yeah, what do you mean when you say that? Which is interesting in itself. But, yeah,
maybe the most authentic thing I could have done was to say nothing.
I had a client who talked about being authentic. My understanding of what she means by that, to be true to her value. And I found myself wondering what's setting those values.
Yeah, good question.
I heard it in relation to some Native American art, which was somehow being perceived as more authentic than another type of art. The terminology is used that it's more real and more primitive. And so, yeah, which I thought was really interesting. So then I was thinking, what makes that authentic and this turn of painting, you know, that was just interesting.
Yeah, I heard it do similar, but I heard someone saying it's an authentic jacket. It's like an authentic Nike or authentic.
Yeah. So that means kind of genuine.
Yeah.
And I think this, kind of
Real,
the thing about what you were saying is because also authentically working class is the kind of thing
Yeah.
yeah. But actually, if you think about that again, they're just saying, does this person fit with my assumptions, kind of cliches about what working class means?
But isn't that also the origin of Heidegger's racism?
Okay, that's a big question that we might well come on to. Yeah.
He was authentically racist.
He's looking for something. So he's looking for something kind of very authentically of the people and of the land and of the blood. Yeah. And well, I think in doing that, he's actually portraying his own understanding of authenticity.
The problem with that is, I think you're talking about two aspects of authenticity. You can be authentic at a personal level. The mistake Heidegger made is he took authenticity to a nationalist or a national level, where he thought that Germany as a German race can actually perpetuate the authenticity that he was seeking. So his problem was, or his mistake was, to expand it into a social arena rather than a personal journey.
Yeah, something that's relevant to individual design.
Yeah,
kind of expands out. Yeah, it's very clear that that's not.
And oddly enough, when you read the diaries, he wasn't specifically fascist in the sense of being anti-Semitic and stuff. His diatribes are all aimed at America in the main. Somehow they're totally inauthentic and they'll never grasp what he has to say about being an art.
I don't want to get too much into this particular question, and he's not yet.
Okay.
But I think there's something about this kind of everyday notion of authenticity. I mean, there seems to be kind of two different notions kind of floating around. There seems to be one that's kind of quite kind of just that it means kind of genuine, or that you are what you say you are. You know, like the work of art is a genuine term. Yeah, is it actually done right?
I was just going to say, for me, the thing about authenticity and autonomy, I sometimes think of authenticity as autonomy. You know, when you talk about possibilities and choices, and when you do something for the other, or because you're viewed, or because somebody's doing this, or because they say that, so you follow that. Whereas I think autonomy is much more linked to authenticity. You say what you say. You speak, and you
Yes,
don't know
yes,
if you're going to speak in some ways.
yeah. So I think you're right. I think that, well, quite my question that notion of autonomy, and I think Heidegger does. But that idea of somehow being true to yourself rather than to yeah, so you're not just playing a role. I mean, of course, that whole idea, it raises more questions than it answers, really. Who is yourself? Not be yourself. Yeah, makes me wonder a bit, like saying earlier, you know, if anyone here is being themselves.
Or even if they know that, for instance, there's a social construction around how we might feel funny.
Yeah, how would we know? Yeah.
Notion of the self.
Yeah,
Is
so,
there a central truth about the self which is fixed? I don't know, is it in something
yeah, which again, yeah, is one of the things that Heidegger's really picking up on, I think.
Also, authentically, I'm quite a hypocrite. So does that make me authentic in my hypocrisy?
Well, yeah, but yeah, exactly. That's that whole question of how could you not be yourself?
Yeah.
You know, kind of being yourself is not being yourself. Yeah, exactly. You get kind of tied up in
not and not.
yes. So well, I think there is this kind of also this kind of strange thing going on here, because I think yeah, if we say there's these two different kinds of authenticity in circulation at the moment, feels to me like that more superficial one, just that you are who you say you are. One of my colleagues yesterday just said something about being authentic, and it was clear what she meant. It was just being open and honest. Yeah. So that kind of version seems to be kind of taking over from the potentially more substantial. So that this idea that getting in touch with your true self just becomes a matter of being. Getting in touch with yourself just becomes just a matter of being genuine, of not being false. And I had a thought about this, and I wonder a bit if the reason why the kind of genuine version, which you might also call the sincerity version, is kind of predominating, might be because we're seeing ourselves more like works of art. That we require are called upon to be created, to be curated, to be presented on social media. That whole kind of way of understanding ourselves. And so the question becomes more and more important: are we who we claim to be? Well, fake news, deep fake, all that kind of stuff. But I think also, as a culture, I think we're avoiding something in this, we're kind of fleeing something, if I can put it. And I think really that's this acknowledgement that we don't really know who we are. But perhaps we aren't really able. And that's obviously quite anxiety provoking. Basically, that there might be nothing to be genuine towards. So that's a thought, actually. We'll come back to think more about this nothing. Look at that. So, just wanted to say quickly, I said I think we can use this kind of more conventional understanding of authenticity, kind of being true to yourself, to think a bit about Freud in a kind of basic kind of way, because he kind of uses a conventional notion of inauthenticity, of not being true to yourself, when he talks about neurosis. That idea that due to social pressures, real or imagined, internalized, the neurotic denies aspects of themselves, of things that they don't think are acceptable or unjustifiable. and then as a result, they cannot tie themselves in that. So you can see how he really kind of buys into that basic kind of idea that we're not true to ourselves. I should have said, I've got lots of things I can say, but I'm also really keen to hear what people have got to say. Feel free to interrupt at any time and ask questions, make points, help us to kind of think together about these issues. I was also going to say a bit about the history of authenticity. I'm going to keep this bit really short, I think, actually, looking at the time and keen to get on to thinking about Heidegger. But it seemed really important to me to kind of really highlight that it's only in a certain kind of culture that the whole idea of authenticity makes sense at all. Lots of kind of traditional cultures that we really know what we're talking about. So keen just to kind of highlight what you might call the kind of cultural conditions that enable the notion of authenticity to make sense to us, in so much as it does. So yes, give us a bit of context for the Heidegger, because I think we can see that some of the tensions in the kind of historical changes also manifest in Heidegger. He tries to kind of resolve them, hold them together. So yeah, I was going to do a decent bit on this, but I'm going to try and do like a 30-second summary. So give me this very, very broad strokes. So I think this is basically culled from Charles Taylor, his work Sources of the Self and Ethics of Authenticity. So basically the idea that the possibility of authenticity depended on two major social shifts at the beginning of the modern era, the Enlightenment and Romanticism. Before that, being true to yourself didn't really make sense. You were either faithful to your social role, you had a place in life, your duty was to fulfill that, or you were faithful to God. So nothing really about inner truth. So the Enlightenment basically kind of separates us off from society. This idea, someone was mentioning about being autonomous, autonomous rational beings, and that's how we're going to determine what the truth is, rather than being determined by tradition or dogma, religion. And then you got Romanticism, which you might think that Romanticism is kind of trying to find meaning in this new disenchanted world. And so encourages us to look inside to find that truth. And as a result, we end up with this idea that we should somehow be true to ourselves. And also that each of us have somehow got a unique self. There also wasn't that idea, even in the kind of Enlightenment rationality. It's very much a kind of general, kind of objective reason, subjective truth. So I think you can see there's some kind of ways, in which these kind of two trends kind of agree with each other, and other ways in which they're kind of intentional. They kind of disagree about the role of nature, or whether truth is objective or subjective. But they also quite coincide in the idea of separating off from society. Those are the two basic, kind of, you could say, the kind of two defining movements of
an observation. about the origin of Germany. I just think that Shakespeare dealt so much with something about the self. That was way in advance of his time, but there's so much in there about something that maybe he himself would call self. But is that internal working, constant going back to what's going on in the self and being true to something which is beyond God? It's not in God, is it? It's something else. It feels to me like that's one of the first really critical examples of, you know, his body of work.
I think that's why it still talks to us now, I think. Kind of on the cusp of that. Yeah. There is also that famous phrase, "Let your own self be true."
Exactly.
Which I read a bit about that.
Yes, yeah.
Well, they suggest actually it's given this Polonius who says it.
Yes,
Who's actually a kind of old
exactly,
windbag.
yeah.
And so it's not quite clear that what he really means. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not as if there's a hard and sharp, sharp kind of division between before and after.
Hello? The Industrial Revolution, I was thinking because before there wasn't really a middle class. And right after that, like right after that, there's like new possibility for people who never really. And so maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, in terms of that freeing you up from your social role as well.
Yeah.
You just had one that you were given.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you can't separate it off from all of these different cultural.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we can't really hear online because it's quite there's a lot of background noise.
Right.
You just all need to shout a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're getting the road or something. I don't know. Yes. Yeah, like that noise.
Yes, I'm afraid it's we're competing with karate or something next door. So we'll just try and talk louder here. Apologies.
Okay, I will try and talk louder. Okay, I think also we can see, I think, how Freud fits into this tradition as well, actually. You know, there's that way in which he sets the individual with their desires against society, you know, as represented by the superego. You might think it's quite kind of classic Rousseau, in a way, you know, born free but everywhere in chains. And we can also see him as, in some ways, an heir of the Enlightenment. You know, he believes that bringing the light of reason to bear will bring relief to suffering. You know, that kind of idea of where it was their ego idea. And also just in the general idea of insight. Yeah, insight-based psychotherapist, I suppose, idea that somehow that's going by making sense of what's going on. But at the same time, I think we can see that, you know, what it might mean to be authentic for Freud is actually a bit more complicated. You know, if you to be true to your Freudian unconscious, it might involve all kinds of dark things that we need civilization to protect themselves from. Argues in his later writings. So actually, he quite destabilizes that whole idea of being true to ourselves in a straightforward way. And I think Heidegger can help us to understand a bit more how that works. That's the general idea of what I'm hoping to kind of show today. So I'm hoping now to kind of turn to the Heidegger. Hopefully people had a chance to read it. Don't know how far through you got with it. It's, you know, it is pretty hard going, as Del acknowledged. But you know, hopefully we can start to kind of unpack a bit of it. Except that we don't necessarily understand all of it. Try and pull out some of the main themes in what he's saying. hopefully people brought the reading with them. And so quite like to kind of skip from one bit to the next a bit more, I think. It might well be that you think other bits are important, and, you know, if that's fine, let us know. Yeah, feel free to pick me up on bits if it's not clear. I can try to clarify. Other people in the room might be able to clarify better. They're a bit unsure about it.
Well, no, I'm unsure that the people can hear. Sorry, we're just unfortunate because it hasn't happened next door for a while.
Where's the microphone down? Is it
Yeah, I'm wondering, yes, could Jake swap with the
So I think if we move that down to just above the TV, possibly pick us up a bit better. Because the focus rate on the computer.
Yeah, it sounds more important picture.
Yeah.
No, but the mic is on that.
Sorry, could I ask what reading?
Okay.
What reading is being recorded?
Should I try that as well? Should I move a bit closer as well? Yeah.
I don't see why he's sitting here and hard.
Where do you want to sit here?
You think? If it's here, then I'll be right next to it. No?
Yeah. Okay. You might hear me. Okay. Is that better? Can people hear us better, or at least hear me better?
That's better. That's better. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so I can't see the clock now. I've got to admit that. So 4 hours over there in the first place.
Do you want time to get this?
We've got about an hour. Yeah. Okay, so as we've acknowledged, Heidegger is quite difficult to read. He's also quite difficult to teach or kind of lead discussion on. Partly because I don't know how much other people know about Heidegger. It might well be there's some people who know really quite a lot, and some people who know less. And there's also that way in which he's quite difficult because it's very hard to take just one bit and look at that, because each term implies the other terms. And they all kind of go around in this big kind of circle. And you kind of see later on this where he talks about resoluteness, where he just kind of adds lots of different bits in to make it make sense. And so there's always going to be another bit that's going to be needed to be added on. So I think we're going to have to acknowledge that what we do is going to be necessarily very incomplete. Just hopefully give you a feeling that you want to kind of find out more and kind of make more sense of what it is that he's saying.
People are asking, could you say exactly what pages, what translation?
So it's the old translation, which is the one that got sent round. And just to be clear, I think we should, for each, if we're talking about something, give the page number, give the paragraph, and the partial paragraph at the top is paragraph 1, and then the page number, and then the line number. So so we can try and be as clear as possible about that. So we just kind of try and get going. So it's 325 is where we start. And there's quite a lot on that first page. Even that kind of the second sentence, the appeal to the they self signifies summoning one's own most self to its potentiality for being. So, to start with that notion of the they self, someone mentioned it earlier, but I'm not sure if everyone's kind of okay with that idea of the they and how that works for Heidegger.
I think some people will and some people won't. So I think it's great if you could assume we know nothing.
Okay. I'm happy to say a little bit about that. So Heidegger has this understanding is that we only understand ourselves and the world that we live in terms of the public understandings that we find ourselves in, the culture that we find ourselves in. And he calls these everyday understandings they. Well, das Man is his, which is translated as they. So it's not, so it's kind of in that kind of phrase, this is how one does things. It's not about a particular person, it's about the kind of, this kind of more abstract mass of people. This is how one does it. And so when we go along with that, Heidegger calls that the they self. Okay. So yeah, these kind of everyday understandings, they are what enable us to make sense of everything around. They enable us to know that that's a chair, or that this is a seminar, or whatever it is. Yeah, we'd be lost. I was going to say we'd be lost without them. I'm not even sure we could imagine ourselves without those things. They fundamentally make up who we are. But at the same time, Heidegger is clear that Dasein, our being, is always our own, and it's our being to be, and only we can do it. So there's this kind of separation between the kind of the way that we or one is as part of the general culture, and the kind of being that we have to be. And that's that kind of difference which opens up the possibility of authenticity. So that idea that we can somehow be ourselves rather than a they self. So yeah, we have this kind of understanding, this kind of the being oneself as opposed to the they self. Yeah, but I think we can also see how he really destabilizes that dichotomy. It's not as straightforward as that, is it? Because the world takes us away from ourselves is also the same world that makes us who we are. So you can't separate one off from the other. So that dichotomy I was talking about in the Enlightenment, where you ideally can be separated off from society and use your kind of pure reason to work out what things mean and what you should be doing. You could say he kind of deconstructs that. It's no longer possible really to make that kind of distinction. So sorry, that's a slightly long-winded way of talking about what the they self is that he's talking about in that first sentence. And then there's that bit about summoning one's own most self to its potentiality for being. What's that? Again, that second sentence, that's line 3. So I think that's again really important. That idea that it's not any specific concrete way of being, but it's to our own most potentiality or ability to be. So it's that opening up of possibility, from the kind of stuckness in convention of just kind of going along with the day. So you could put it as being it's our existential potential calling us from our existential. People know that distinction as well, that he uses quite a lot. The existential, as in the kind of worked out idea of what being is, the kind of thing that Heidegger's doing, and then the existential is the particular concrete manifestation of it that each one of us is doing at any one time. So it's calling us from that particular manifestation we're in at that moment to kind of more to existential possibility. Well, you might call it self-transcendence. To be more than ourselves.
Not more of ourselves.
I suppose it could be either. Yeah, because it's all us, isn't it? Yeah, it's not never anything other than us, but there's more of it, potentially. Okay, and then it then talks about also about, well, I mean, I think it's perhaps important just to be clear. So he's talking about call of conscience here, but it's a very different from conventional notions of conscience. It's not talking about you're doing something wrong or you should do something good or any of those kind of things. It's very, I think someone mentioned earlier about that should be more authentic to say nothing. You know, this is kind of contentless. Which is in fact what he goes on to say later on, doesn't he? In the fourth paragraph, he says, the second line, the cause says nothing.
Page.
Sorry, that same page, fourth paragraph, second line. Says nothing, gives no information. Yeah, sorry, yeah, so exactly.
So the cause says nothing, somewhere I'm looking at that.
Yeah, no, next one down, because that little bit at the top counts as the first paragraph.
So this one here?
No. Oh, yeah, bottom paragraph, second line.
Second line. Yes, okay.
Yeah, and then the fourth line, he starts talking about where does the call come from? Okay, and I think that's a really important thing for us to think about as therapists. Okay, what might be our role here? Because at this point he's saying the call comes from uncanniness. That kind of not being at home in the tranquil world of the day, that kind of way in which that doesn't ever quite fulfill us or isn't ever quite all of us. We're always homeless in a way, as he uses at other times. Yeah, not quite at home in the world. And I quite like that. Just over the page at the top, he has that thing, the first line where he says, "The whence of the calling is the whither to which we are called back."
Is that the uncanniness? The idea, like, you know, in Freud's paper, the uncanny.
Yeah.
That's almost like the face-to-face with the self that isn't the self. Is that very like a doppelganger?
Yeah, well, exactly that the way that you're not identical with yourself.
Yes.
It's the kind of thing we're going to come on to.
And it's spooky.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and Heidegger says anxiety provoking. You know,
Yes.
that's the feeling he associates with this.
That means something that it's just beyond yourself. It just feels you don't know it yet. It's just on the edge, or
Potentially, yeah. I think just always not quite coinciding. Yeah, I think it's quite hard to describe really what that is, because again, it says nothing. So it's not as if it's telling us what it is. It's just disrupting us.
It's us, but not us.
Yeah.
Feels like maybe I've said the thing about the nothing, and sometimes I think the most authentic thing is to just not get wrapped up in the day. So, you know, maybe, and sometimes maybe you're to kind of protest, maybe a kind of defiance against it. Feels, I don't know.
But isn't the thing with nothing that it's not something to grasp intellectually. The body knows more about nothing than the intellect.
Yes, yeah, I think it certainly isn't that it's not intellectual. It's not, and he comes. It's really hard to talk about this without constantly jumping ahead to things that are going to come up later. But yes, it's certainly not a kind of intellectual thing that might be worked out that might then allow you to see the world over there in a certain kind of way. It's very much only in the doing that you might get the feel for it. So again, that kind of feel for it, which is always partly a bodily kind of thing.
He mentioned somewhere about reticence, doesn't he? Is it this section?
That's coming on, in the next bit.
Ahead.
Yeah, and we constantly will be jumping ahead or coming back, linking all these different terms up.
Yeah. There's a few oddities in there, though, isn't there? If I go back to Dasein, we speak of it as being there, but it's actually not being there. because that almost implies you know where you're heading. It's more that there is their being. Their being is something completely topsy-turvy, because you don't know where the there of your being is, but it's always something that is the next step. So that's one part of it. The other aspect for me would be, how does it link to some of what you're saying? How does the whole thing integrate in terms of psychosomatic aspects, in terms of psyche and soma? And actually, in later writings, Heidegger actually points out that our perspective of something being psychosomatic implies that we know what we're talking about, but we don't, because the definitions are from a science that actually causes the split. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, so, I mean, it's a really good point, and I think is that in the Zolokon seminars he talks about that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting and really worth thinking more about. I'm not really prepared for that one right now. Well, actually, talking of jumping ahead though, I think it is worth jumping ahead a bit now because, okay, at this point he's saying the call comes from our uncanniness and not quite sure where, you know, from our potentiality to being, calling us to our potentiality to being, perhaps. But in the next section, he has a very different answer. People got onto that. In fact, so perhaps it's worth actually just going ahead quickly there to 344. Is it okay to skip ahead? 344, third paragraph, which is the one at the bottom. In the one below that, in the light. So then, so the second sentence, second line, it says Dasein's resoluteness, and we haven't come on to talk about resoluteness yet. So let's just say Dasein's authenticity. Dasein's resoluteness towards itself is what first makes it possible to let the others who are with it be in their own most potentiality for being, and to co-disclose this potentiality in the solicitude which leaps forth and liberates. When Dasein is resolute, it can become the conscience of others. So he has a totally different take on it in this bit, where he's saying that we can be the source of that call.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was reading this and thinking, what it sounds like, feels like, well, maybe the implications for us as therapists is what we can be kind of role models in a way, in our being authentic and our resoluteness. You know, someone we might, without pushing someone down the path, we could set an example of how to be, in a way, which then is then you're kind of following others, and then is that authentic? To be following in the footsteps of someone else.
Well, yes, yeah. Again, that's something he comes on to a lot when he talks about our relationship to the tradition and the idea of choosing your hero.
Yeah,
actually. But yeah, it's really hard to know exactly how it might work that we could be that cool, especially when we're saying nothing. And of course, it's only if you're authentic that somehow you can take up this position. And I mean, I'm pretty wary of anybody who says they're authentic. So, yeah, so it's a very tricky and uncomfortable position to think about actually what that might mean anyway. So.
I just take us back. So in the they is like a social or for the social. Whereas in Dasein, it's more individual.
Kind of yes and no, because partly yes, authenticity pulls you out of the day, but it returns you to the day because there's nowhere else to be. So.
And when it pulls you out of they, you're in design then?
Well, design is, you're there, that's what you are the whole time anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
As whether you might be slightly, potentially for a moment, slightly more authentic.
Do you think it matters that there's this what he has to say about being in the world with others, and so Dasein is always going to be in the world with other Dasein, and so the whole thing about individual versus group is you know, Dasein is always with other people. So
yeah,
so yeah,
and that with other people is part of what makes us who we are. You can't somehow separate that off. Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
By that, sorry, do you kind of mean that? So we're constituted of the they that we internalize, and that's the whole fabric of developed meaning and everything. But then, even if we're by ourselves and we have many hours a day, which might just be to ourselves physically, we still have completely introjected or internalized that whole.
Yes, he would.
Sorry, I'm going to fuss about internalized and introjected because it's not Heidegger in a way. It might be close to Freud, or psychoanalysis, but it's a similar idea. I think it's the idea that you know we're always with other people, and how other people behave. Like I can't remember who I was speaking to, but if you say a word in English like controversy, and everyone around you says controversy, I think you're likely to change. I mean, Dasein does sort of, you know, it fits in. It's in the world with other people.
And what about doing in the woods in a cabin on your own?
He would say that the being with, yeah, the being with is the condition of possibility of being alone or with people.
Oh,
I think Jessica's asking something, at least I'm wondering what you're asking is, so there's being in the world with others, but then there's the they sort of stuff, but then there's something else when you might sort of be in a different way, yeah? Which is
all that.
Well, you're always in the world with others, according, I think, as I understand it, with regard to Heidegger, yeah? But there's a way in which you just go along with whatever's being said, you don't really think, yeah? But there's a moment when perhaps that isn't happening, and that's this leading to what you're talking about, being authentic, isn't it? This, yeah. I don't need to explain it better, but I think that's what you're asking. But you're always, so you're in the world with others, and there's always this delay. But there are times when maybe through something where they call it uncanny or whatever, you can actually be authentic.
Is it like it's not just the emphasis on you're there in the world with others, it's that you're there in the world with others. So there's, you know, like with O'Neill's example, your example, I think the notion of controversy, I can't remember who's saying it, O'Neill. But there might be some people who quite like to be different, who will stay with what the others aren't saying. So it feels like there's something about, there's the you that decides as well, but you're in this world with others, which also constitutes you. But there's still the you that can decide, I'm going to say controversy. You know, so there's the potential in all of us, and therefore in that side, sort of to be and do both. I don't know if there's something about that Dasein isn't always just the individual person. I don't think. There's something about the nature of individual persons.
Can I just ask, sorry, so if Dasein is always with people, I just wondered, because I was thinking that if I sit around the kitchen table with my family, there are people, but I can also be in the world with people like people I don't know. I can be in my town, I can be in the Europe, I can be in the world. Who am I with? Who is Dasein with?
Go for it, Daniel.
Sorry, it is not so much people. It's the being. You know, like apart from being Helena, you are. You know, you there is a being. You know, that's the Dasein. You know, it's the fact of being there rather than who is there.
Yeah, and interestingly, Heidegger, when he introduces the idea of being with, he's not talking about hanging out with some other people or meeting somebody. Yeah, he introduces it in the context of I think it's tools, of a hammer. That it's only that knowing what a hammer is and what to do with it implies that there are other people who've made that hammer and have an idea of what it is, and so there's a general understanding of what a hammer is, or a chair being actually a chair rather than just a few bits of wood. So yeah, so it's much more kind of fundamental to that in terms of being able to understand anything in the world. You have to have other people around it. We are just absolutely inherently social, whether there's people around or not.
Yeah. But then with the hammer, I think most of us would know what to do with a hammer, like know what its uses are. But I don't think it's always so simple for people to know how to be with other beings. Yeah. Even here, or like if you're in an airport and you see a queue, but there's someone free there in the checkout, and there's 6 or 7 people in the queue. Maybe you just more unconsciously fall into the queue as opposed to going, well, hang on, no, there's someone. I'm just going to walk up to the bar, maybe. I think that's the way I think of it. I always fall back from that.
Well, you use the word fall, and that's what he describes. He says falling is the act of, you know, that you're always in a state of throwness in the world, but it's when you fall or are in a state of falling that is when you have kind of truly departed, it seems, from an authentic sort of experience for yourself, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's really tricky because he uses it as 2 ways. Yeah, in one way, yeah, if you're going along with the they, you're falling, you're fleeing from anxiety, perhaps you're inauthentic, perhaps. But he's also saying there's nowhere else to be, and that's just where we are. You know, we can't. You know, if without that, we wouldn't know what to do with this weird bit of wood with a metal thing on the end. You know, so it's both of those at the same time. I think, and that's part of what makes it quite tricky, and also what I think makes it really interesting. It's not this kind of simplistic. Oh, I'm not going to go along with convention. I'm going to do my own thing, as if somehow that could really be possible.
Yeah, because earlier on, I think it's early on, he's in this being in time. There's something around. I don't think he's not critical about people falling into the pattern of the day, is he?
Sometimes he is, sometimes he isn't. But,
okay, maybe they're just probably not anywhere near enough. But yeah.
But yes, but he shouldn't be critical, I think. But he sometimes isn't.
Yeah, no, just say yes. I think he's both, isn't he? He's always there. He seems to be saying that you can't get away from there. You are one of the, but as I think you're talking about now, Jay, there's something, isn't there, about how whatever authenticity has got to do with it, it's something about how you don't quite fall in with them. So I think there's the idea that you've got to fall in with people, and there's a way in which you can fall out of falling in with people, isn't that? That's the sort of idea, isn't it?
Yeah. I've got some things I really want to make sure I kind of hit and say. Otherwise, I won't have done what I said I was going to do. So
don't be true to yourself.
No, exactly. Exactly. In the kind of more genuine kind of way. Yeah. So I'd quite like to kind of jump ahead a bit. I mean, the whole next bit is that whole thing about guilt, where he does the kind of thing of looking at the kind of conventional notion and kind of teasing that out and kind of coming up with this basic kind of understanding that being guilty is to do with owing and being responsible for a lack. Yeah, but being very clear that that lack can't be understood as simply something present at hand, just a thing over there that could somehow be added in or paid up, because Dasein's being is not like that. So then he needs to think more about
okay, so what is this lack? What does it mean that we might be guilty in a kind of more fundamental way? And I think it's really helpful for us to kind of go on to think a bit more about that, which is page 329. So that kind of whole second paragraph, starting at the top. So nevertheless, in the idea of guilty, there lies the character of the not. So he's making it really kind of abstract at this point. And then Yankee needs to kind of pull it back in to try to make sense of what this might be. So if we go down line 6, he has the idea of guilty as being the basis for, and I think it's line 8. He then kind of redefines lack or not as nullity. So I'm not quite sure here he keeps kind of translating things to try. I think it's partly to try and get away from the kind of conventional understandings of these words. He's constantly trying to help us avoid kind of slipping back into the usual way of understanding them. So he comes up with this phrase, being the basis of a nullity, which, in a way, he could have kind of perhaps more easily and more understandably have put as being responsible for a lack. But I think he feels that that's too easy to misinterpret. But still, there's this idea of what is this nullity? That's kind of at the heart of us. That we're, what does it consist of? We've been told it doesn't. It's not something that's kind of somehow just missing, and it can be kind of put back. It's something else. So if we go on to the last paragraph, and he brings in a lot of different words which all will have their own technical kind of meanings, but I think the basic thing he's saying, if you in that second line halfway through, is Dasein is something that has been thrown. Okay, so really he's talking about that facticity, thrownness, as being the kind of answer or a kind of clue to what it might be that's lacking in our being. So the idea of thrownness, which he kind of goes on to talk a bit more about, that idea that you just find yourself wherever it is you find yourself. You kind of been just dumped into a particular time and place, and it's not, as he says, it's not of your own accord or your own choosing. This is just where you are. Okay, and again, this is what fundamentally makes you who you are, is just where you happen to be, the culture you happen to be in. That example of the queues, it might well depend on where that airport is or what culture you're coming from. If you're very English, you might join the end of the queue. Somewhere else, you might nip to the front. Totally kind of varies, doesn't it? Without kind of thinking twice about it. That's just.
Sorry, did you say
But
that?
isn't it more fundamental? Sorry, Tim.
No. You were saying that's the answer to it somehow. That it's not a lack. It's not a lack because with where we find ourselves, we've grown where we are in that thing, and that's the answer. It's like that substance. Is that what you meant?
Well, I think it becomes clearer what significance of thrownness for this lack if we just go on a little bit further. So if you kind of go over the page, that first paragraph, 4 lines down, I think it's really important that thrownness, however, does not lie behind us, as some event which has just happened. So in fact, that way I just put it, kind of somehow being dumped, isn't actually a very good example of it. It's it's not something which has factually befallen and fallen loose from Dasein again. On the contrary, as long as Dasein as care is constantly, it's constantly thrown. That's all constantly making us up who we are. It's not as if we're thrown once at the beginning and then can start to make our own life out of that. We're constantly being remade by the culture that we find ourselves in.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because then you start to think here that maybe there's a kind of, probably the wrong way to say it, but there's a part to being authentic. You have to put quite careful consideration of kind of what arenas in life you put yourself in, what you choose to subject yourself to. You know, quite, you know, choosing to be here. You know,
yeah, which fits in with what we were saying earlier about the Industrial Revolution and kind of that of freeing up roles and movement in general. So there's a lot on this page. This page 330 was kind of really answers that kind of question about what is it about thrownness that implies that there's a lack in us. And if we go to that third paragraph, third line down, thus being a basis means never to have power over one's own most being from the ground up. Okay, this not belongs to the existential meaning of thrownness. So I think that's him kind of trying to explain why thrownness in itself constitutes this kind of lack.
Is it something in there about it being the thrownness represents something about which a sign has no power? It's not a choice. There's a total lack of agency.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's this kind of gap between power and responsibility. Being the basis means you're responsible for yourself, but you're responsible for this thing that actually you haven't got power over. In a way, you're kind of responsible for something you're not responsible for. To use the word slightly differently. And it's that kind of.
But then you can choose. Yeah, I'm saying that's why it's important to think about it where you choose to put yourself in the world. If you don't want to get burned, don't be in the sun. You see what I mean? If you put yourself in the sun, you're going to be subject to something which is against your control. You can't put yourself in the sun and stop yourself.
You didn't get to choose to be thrown into a world that is on a planet that happens to have our sun.
You're quite right. Yeah.
So fundamental underlying things.
Freedom. Yeah, you're limited, isn't it? Isn't it? That's the whole thing. Limited.
Yeah. So you lack agency.
What little agency? Variety. But is it what little agency you do have? Maybe you do want to make the most of it. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think agency, and we could come on to this a bit later, is actually a very tricky term in this context as well, actually. But I think just to stick with this thing about, we're saying about power, that difference between power and responsibility, that way in which as a result, your kind of being is yours and it's not yours at the same time. You're kind of responsible for it, but actually, you didn't make it, you didn't choose it, and yet you're responsible for it. I think that's the way that he's arguing that we, as a result, don't coincide with ourselves.
Would I be hearing it right if I were to say you're responsible for the nullity?
Yeah.
Rather than trying to fill it up.
Yeah, and he would say, you can't fill it up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and in a sense, that's what he's saying authenticity is.
But I do wonder if it's waiting to be filled. Sometimes I'm sorry to take it there, but I think of Donald Trump and those who follow. I just we were saying about being careful of the heroes of who we follow and who we choose, and I wonder if there is something about, it may be misplaced, but wanting to fill that nullity, attempting to fill it, attempting to follow, and however one does that. Yeah,
absolutely. And he thinks that as a kind of fleeing from that anxiety of our being and our authentic being.
That nullity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think you're right. It's a constant kind of temptation to fill it. Yeah.
Like a promise that, is that what Trump's doing? Like there's giving a promise that you will feel whole.
as if there is a wholeness.
Yeah. And actually, I think we're doing that much more often than that because, yeah, if we're thinking that authenticity is then a manner, is, yeah, as you say, responsibility for our nullity, acknowledging this kind of essential kind of way in which we're not identical with ourselves, that we can't be, we're responsible for things we're not responsible. It doesn't all add up. So if that's authenticity, insofar as we've got to so far, then inauthenticity, that would be saying or kind of enacting an understanding of itself as essentially self-identical, as capable of coinciding with yourself, kind of, and so being able to be what you say you are. And we mentioned that earlier, didn't we? Yeah. That's what the conventional understanding of authenticity is. That idea that you can be what you say you are, that you are what you say you are. And yet for Heidegger, that's the definition of inauthenticity.
Is that because it's not respecting the multitude to ourselves, the complexity, and it's maybe, I know I'm speaking the wrong language often, but like maybe trying to construct or perfect a persona which we then try and align with or something like that?
Yeah, rather than being able to stay with the void of whatever it is that means we can't quite do that.
What do you think that means for calling yourself a therapist?
Yeah, certainly an authentic therapist. Yeah, as I said, very wary of anything like that.
I think that's the case if you make up the story after the event.
Staying with not knowing.
Could you speak up?
It's about staying with not knowing for a therapist. It's about being able to stay with not knowing rather than saying, well, I think you should do this. It's just like,
we can't.
Keep it open.
When we're looking to get clients and advertise us, we can't stay with not knowing them. We have to call
Yeah,
ourselves.
I think that is a real problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Certainly a problem. Yeah.
The managerial culture, which says, yes, you've got something wrong with you, this is the answer.
Well, and we're in very much a self-promotion culture as well. Yeah, we, to exist on the internet, you have to say things. So this idea that you might say nothing. If you say nothing, you don't exist. So it's very hard to understand how this fits into contemporary culture.
It's about anxiety, isn't it? In order to get away from anxiety, we have to present ourselves as having no answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As if we've got some answers.
This is something like the idea that you are something in itself. Isn't that what the knot is about? And just think about psychotherapy and maybe our training. Maybe there's something about well, I don't think we can say it actually, but there's something about how we can behave as if, or pretend that whatever it is that we happen to advocate must be the truth, or must be the right thing. But I think Heidegger's saying something about that there's a kind of emptiness in us, that nullity, that we're not a particular thing. And I think the idea is that we might get confused, worried, distracted by the they, and think that we are, that's what we are all the way down. As it were. I think there's something like that, isn't there?
Is that a bit like Sartre's waiter?
I think Sartre takes the nothingness from here.
Yeah.
That's what he does.
Yeah, I know there are times in this where I caught myself using kind of Sartre language, and I kind of took it out again.
Yes.
Is it a bit like saying that we are strangers to ourselves?
Yeah, I guess one way of putting it. Yeah, though it kind of, there's an implication in there, something about knowing as well. Though
we don't know who we are.
Yeah, and certainly Heidegger. Another point he's making is that we there's no way we could ever know ourselves fully. That's one of the implications of being towards death, that you will never know your death, so you will never know the completion. So again, another way in which we can never be complete.
But there's the death and the birth bit which he leaves out. But I mean, he's saying something about how we're not self-generating as well, isn't he? So he's saying something about
I want to go on to say, because I did promise that I would say something about kind of relating this to the Freudian unconscious. I kind of feel I should say that, as I said I would. I mean, obviously, there's lots more we can talk about. But I mean, I don't know. This is obviously a kind of existential analytic course. I don't know if any of you, or kind of assuming none of you are particularly taken with the idea of the unconscious. Perhaps you are, I don't know.
I am.
Oh, right, okay, good.
I think it's quite easy to find yourself thrown into the idea of it, right?
Right.
Because it's quite pervasive, even just in like popular,
yes.
Popular
Not
culture.
outside this room.
Huh?
Not
think you
outside this room.
I think you're
No, I think we live in a Freudian culture in some ways. So yeah, okay. So I won't assume that. But anyway, I think we can actually think of it and what's going on quite helpfully in the terms that Heidegger's brought up so far. I'm not kind of trying to map one onto the other in any kind of straightforward way, but just saying that somehow there's a kind of coinciding at this point, that some of the implications are kind of similar. So, yeah, perhaps I don't really need to say this, but perhaps, if we think of the unconscious as something that means we're always in conflict with ourselves, we're never kind of lacking in we're always lacking in consistency, never identical with ourselves. There's always more things going on that we're not aware of. And if we think, the implication is that the unconscious is socially constructed all the way down. I was talking earlier about repression and the superego. Clearly, that's socially constructed. It's based on assumptions about what one should do.
It's the content of the unconscious that would be socially constructed, perhaps, rather than the unconscious itself. I don't know.
Well, no, I think both. I think certainly the superego. If that's saying, I don't particularly want to get into this language too much, but if it's saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, that's because of particular social norms, isn't it?
Yeah,
so it's clearly socially constructed. And there's also that way in which the conscious shows itself in just in the way we find ourselves behaving. We kind of realize things about ourselves. if
Are you using unconscious synonymously with id?
Kind of, I suppose. Yeah. I don't want to get too caught up in the technicalities of that, because actually that's not the point. I think the point is more that so if we think then that the idea of authenticity is not to overcome guilt, but to kind of take responsibility for the particular basis into which one is thrown, the particular projections one makes upon that basis, to make one's necessarily guilty existence one's own, rather than just the they self. That I think actually there's quite a parallel there to how we might relate, or how psychoanalysis might think of relating to the unconscious. Similar kind of thing. If we're going to want to own up to our own, very complicated, conflicted desires, desires we haven't chosen, haven't created, don't have any power over, but that make us who we are. Make us who we are and that we're responsible for. That seems to me to be a pretty good description of what psychoanalysis is aiming for. So
again,
I think that's a pretty good description of that idea of kind of owning up to taking responsibility for acknowledging all these aspects of ourselves that we can't, that make us who we are, that we can't really, that we're responsible for, but that we didn't do ourselves. Somehow, came from outside. So that's the general idea I was thinking about here. It's obviously kind of trying to take two different languages and kind of somehow put them kind of in parallel.
Is that like the guilt of ourselves, the guilt being more. Is it a bit like original sin? You're just born with it.
Yeah. Yes, though there's a kind of, something about original which suggests it happened back then, but it's fundamental to us at one time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that shows Heidegger's Christian background into that kind of idea. Though I suppose I'm also saying there's something like that in Freud as well. This idea.
Is there a difference between what we didn't do and what we didn't create? So we're responsible for what we do, but not for desires.
I think we're responsible all the way down.
Right.
Even for those things that, we didn't do that were done to us almost. The way it. That's just in the end. You have to take that all on.
It feels a bit like that thing kids say when they say I didn't ask to be born. It's like you can't not be responsible for your life at a very basic level just because you didn't ask to be born. The responsibility is still innate for your life.
Fundamental. Yeah, so how do we take that on?
Again, different language, just really broad brushstrokes. But
yeah.
And he's asking us to grasp first of all, there's a kind of mental and intellectual gymnastics. Get it? So once you're getting it, you're sort of confronted by this responsibility that you're saying goes all the way down to this thing that we were thrown into. Sobering.
Yeah. I'm just aware of the time. I just haven't got much longer. There's quite a lot. There's so much more we could talk about here. I'm going to fit it all in the next 6 minutes. We could just say no. Yeah, and that's, presumably that's what we're doing most of the time.
Right.
Is saying no to this. Is there anything someone else wants to particularly bring up for the last 6 minutes?
I'm tempted to say something about, it's an idea that both Heidegger and Freud are preoccupied with how we might distract ourselves from ourselves. Heidegger with the they and other people, and Freud. That's harder, isn't it? But we might be involved in all sorts of acting out and defences, etc.
But it's sublimation.
And it's possible too. But there's a way in which we can try and keep ourselves from ourselves in a way.
But sometimes I think Freud is saying that can be a good thing. Say, for example, with sublimation.
Good thing. Yeah, I suppose sublimation is a good thing. That's a different kind of distracting ourselves, isn't it? It's not so much distracting ourselves as a kind of using what it is that we find in order to make something else. It's transforming something.
It's transforming something that's otherwise unacceptable into something that's acceptable, which is kind of one way of doing it.
Yes, which is different from
yeah.
Given we've just got a few minutes, one other thing I'd like to say, because I think there was a thing about agency earlier and choosing, and I think that's really important to say something about, because also I think there's an interpretation of authenticity and existentialism, the kind of more popular version and perhaps the more kind of Sartre version, which tends to have that kind of idea that we can just somehow resolutely decide to be authentic and take a stand and all that kind of thing. And Heidegger is constantly undermining that as an idea. And he has this kind of phrase later on, letting one's ownmost self take action in itself of its own accord. So that kind of passive kind of letting. it's the beginning of that next section. Oh, sorry, the second section I asked you to read, 342, first paragraph, page line 5. And I think that's just really important that we remember that, because it's just so hard to find and to hold that kind of middle voice between that kind of activity and passivity that he's trying to do. Yeah, he says at one point in another lecture course, Introduction to Metaphysics, the idea that all willing should be grounded in letting be offends the understanding. It's just really hard to get your head around it, and our language itself is set up so that it's got to be one or the other, really. And so we're always going to be finding ourselves going one way or the other. Either this is just something that happens to us, or it's something that we decide to do. And how do we hold that kind of middle ground? Which again, I think is something that we really come up against in therapy. If it was easy just to decide to be different, we would all do it. But it's not all. Therapy is also not something that's done to you. So how do we again hold that kind of middle ground between those two?
Are you saying something as well about when you said, Industrial Revolution, being born, we live in a very, very individualistic society. You can say there's lots of pressure to, do or become whatever. And are there times where that maybe that kind of friction between authenticity and the they can sort of be greater at a point in time than another point in time?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I don't suppose we all know. We've just got this type, but yeah.
I don't know what you were saying is something like it makes me think of a client of mine who was very much looking to belong in a community. I've got 2 clients now. Think of it. Is that the thing with the they is hard because on page 346 he says something about the they knows only the general situation, loses itself in those opportunities which are closest to it. And there is an appeal, isn't there, to just fall in with people in the community, and I suppose I feel lucky that I found this community here where I can sort of feel like I fall in and be, dare I say, authentic. But then I think 30-something years before that, I don't think I had that luxury. If I wanted to see friends, there was an element of just having to fall in, otherwise I'd not have friends.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite hard. And with makes me think of my family as well, who are all heavy drinkers, and I've stopped drinking now. So to separate myself from them, I gained something, I think, from. But also, I'm very cut off from now, and that's quite sad in a way. Would I be better off not?
That's brought us a bit back to where we started in terms of about knowing, and about this seems to be a non-intellectual knowing. It's not. And so, how do you know if you're being authentic?
Can you say something about not thinking? Just being.
But surely, as soon as you start to think about it, because you're then, I'm going to be authentic, but it's not authentic.
You wrote a really long book. I must have been thinking about it.
Yeah, strangely, despite having written this really long book, Heidegger's quite, anti-thinking in a way. That, he says most of the time we're not thinking, not just in the kind of falling in with the they kind of way, but just in the way that we're just getting on with life. We just got to feel for it. That kind of, a lot of it's that kind of bodily kind of thing, isn't it?
Was it good? It seems to be presented as something that's desirable.
Well, that's a good question, and I think that's part why I wanted to say do that bit about the history of authenticity. I think it's only within a certain culture that that's thought of as being good. Actually, the cultures would have thought, "What do you mean? That's the work of the devil." Or whatever.
I wonder if there's something deeper in there, where he's talking the nullity or whatever. It's about bringing into the world of representation or presentation something that is not presented, it's unrepresented, being the unpresentable into presentation. So there's no element of being able to copy in that kind of element. In contact and in comparison, the unconscious is actually, as Sally said, it's sublimated presentation that you're bringing into consciousness. So I'm wondering whether there's two different ways of alluding to the unrepresented.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. That both is just an allusion to it, isn't it? But that's all it can be.
I'm kind of thinking that's a key in terms of the soul and the sort of nakedness of the soul before God is a very individual thing. Just as a sense of facing the infinite and being able to face the anxiety of being naked, is bearing the soul, the incomprehensible God of Christianity is all-knowing and powerful. And there's a very individualistic strand, isn't there, in Christianity, which is a very cultural thing, maybe caught up in that, Kierkegaard, Heidegger. The sense of the individual is something that's desirable, individual soul-searching and responsibility, which perhaps isn't always in other cultures so much.
I think it's right, and to go back to Kierkegaard, because I think one of the things is about detachment. I think there's something that authenticity maybe has a place in cultures where detachment is thought to be superior to attachment, so that you can be sort of scientific and cognitive, etc. And I think Kierkegaard's preoccupied with things like detachment, Nietzsche too. And I think Heidegger has inherited that this idea that the stuff about the they and authenticity is partly, I think, about not being so detached. It's about being brought back to yourself.
Yeah.
And you know.
Yeah, absolutely. You're never taken out. You're always just brought back in.
Yeah.
Should we see final words? I don't know, it feels to be like this is very incomplete. We haven't.
Well, you get us going.
Well, exactly. Yes. So that's the right place to be leaving this.
Never complete. In fact, what was it helping us get on, helping us and helping others get on with life, really? So thank you very much. I mean, I just thought maybe to rely on Tina Turner, but there's that thing is often forget what's authenticity got to do with it? Yeah, to do with it. Yeah. Can we thank Jake very much? Yeah.